The scratching at this gas station door came just after midnight, weak, uneven, almost swallowed by the rain. Officer Ethan Walker, a 30-year-old night patrol cop, nearly drove past. Then he heard it. A broken whimper that cut past training and went straight to the part of him that still ran toward danger. When Ethan stepped into the rain, a wounded German shepherd collapsed at the door, its amber eyes locked on his like it had come for him on purpose. This dog wasn't lost. It was running from something. If this story moves you, please subscribe and stay until the end. Comment below where you're watching from, and let's begin. Cold rain swept sideways across the highway, blurring the world into neon reflections and shadow, turning the gas station into a lonely island of light in a sea of wet darkness. Officer Ethan Walker cruised slowly past the pumps, windshield wipers struggling against the downpour. He was 30 years old, tall and lean, his shoulders squared by years of discipline rather than bulk. His winter police uniform, dark navy, insulated, collar raised high, was heavy with rain. The badge on his chest caught the station's pale glow, dull but steady, much like the man wearing it. Ethan didn't wear a hat. His short-cropped brown hair lay flat against his head, plastered by moisture, exposing a face defined by sharp cheekbones, a tight jaw, and eyes that rarely softened. People often mistook his quiet for coldness. In truth, it was restraint, something learned young, something survival had taught him. He had requested night patrols near the edge of town on purpose. Fewer people, less noise, less conversation. 3 years earlier, a domestic call gone wrong had left his partner bleeding out on wet pavement, while Ethan waited for backup that came too late. The investigation cleared him, but the silence afterward stayed. Since then, Ethan spoke less, listened more, and trusted only what he could see. The gas station was closed, its glass doors dark behind metal shutters. Ethan slowed the cruiser, checking the lot out of habit. That was when he heard it, a sound barely louder than the rain. Scratch, pause, scratch. Ethan's foot eased off the accelerator. His pulse shifted, not racing, just tightening. Wind made noise. Rain made noise. Animals didn't usually approach light, not in weather like this. He rolled down the window slightly. The cold air slapped his face, and there it was again. Scratch. Thud. He parked. As he stepped out, rain soaked instantly through his gloves. He followed the sound toward the front door of the station. Something lay hunched near the glass, almost blending into shadow. Then it moved. A German shepherd, full-grown, large even by the breed standards, likely 4 or 5 years old. Its coat, once a classic tan and black, was matted with mud and dark streaks that Ethan recognized too quickly as dried blood. One front leg trembled beneath its weight. The dog lifted its head, just barely, and scraped a paw weakly against the glass. The eyes stopped Ethan cold. Amber, clear, focused, not wild, not frantic, aware. "Hey," Ethan said quietly, his voice rough from disuse more than cold. He crouched slowly, palms open, keeping his movements deliberate. The dog didn't retreat. It swayed, breath shallow, ribs moving too fast. Up close, the injuries told a story. A healed tear along the flank. Rope burns, old but unmistakable. In around one hind leg, This wasn't a stray that had lost a fight. This was an animal that had survived something. As Ethan reached out, the dog's ears flicked, not in fear, but recognition. Its tail did not wag. It simply held his gaze. "You're hurt," Ethan murmured. "Real bad." When his hand brushed the dog's neck, his fingers caught on something beneath the wet fur. A scar, not fresh, old, thickened, curved. Ethan's breath stalled. The shape was wrong for an accident. Too clean, too deliberate, like a hook. The dog let out a low sound. Not a growl, not a whine. A breath of pain, controlled, contained. Ethan swallowed. He slid an arm under the dog's chest, bracing himself. "You're gonna hate this," he said softly. The dog did not resist as Ethan lifted it. It was heavy, solid muscle, wasted by exhaustion, but it clung to him just enough to stay upright. Rain plastered its fur against Ethan's uniform, streaking red onto navy blue. As he carried the dog toward the cruiser, something stirred in his mind, a memory he had buried 3 years ago, an evidence board, grainy photos printed and pinned, a crime scene behind a closed warehouse, blood on concrete, and in the corner of one photograph, half cut off, almost dismissed, a dog being dragged away, neck twisted just enough to show a curved scar beneath its collar. At the time, they'd assumed it belonged to the victim. No one had asked what happened to it. Ethan opened the cruiser door and laid the dog carefully across the back seat. The animal's breathing hitched, then steadied, its eyes never leaving him. "You walked a long way to get here," Ethan said, more to himself than to the dog. The rain drummed harder now, as if urging him to hurry. Ethan shut the door and leaned against the cruiser for a moment, water running down his face like sweat. His hands shook, not from cold, from recognition, from the sickening sense that this wasn't chance. That this dog hadn't come here to die. It had come here to be seen. And somewhere in the dark, someone would not want that. Ethan brought the dog into the station through the side entrance, rainwater pooling at his boots as the automatic door slid shut behind him. The building was quiet at this hour, the night shift reduced to humming lights, the distant crackle of a radio, and the faint smell of old coffee. He laid the dog gently on a blanket near the holding desk, removing his soaked gloves with careful hands. Up close, under steady fluorescent light, the animal looked even worse than it had in the rain thinner than it should have been, ribs faintly visible beneath mud-caked fur, muscles tight with pain but held together by something stubborn and unyielding. Ethan worked methodically. He cleaned the shallow cuts first, then the deeper wound along the shoulder where the fur had grown back unevenly. That was when the truth became unavoidable. Yet this wasn't one incident. This was a history written into flesh. The rope burns were old, layered, as if restraints had been used more than once. Beneath the scar on the neck, he found another mark, small, circular, healed badly. A bullet entry wound, no exit. The dog had been shot and survived. "You've been through hell," Ethan muttered. The dog did not whine. It did not bare its teeth. It simply lay there, breathing through pain with practiced control. Its eyes followed Ethan's hands, alert but calm, like it was assessing him in return. Ethan had worked with K9 units before. He recognized that look. This dog had been trained, disciplined, taught to endure. He needed a name, not because it changed anything, but because it grounded him. He glanced at the way the dog's body cast a long silhouette across the floor, dark against the tile, unmoving but present. "Shadow," he said quietly. "I'll call you Shadow." The dog blinked once. That was all. But it didn't look away. Later, after basic care was done and Shadow was resting, Ethan sat at his desk with a cup of coffee gone cold in his hands. He logged into the case archive, fingers stiff, not from cold now, but from a familiar tension he hadn't felt in years. The unsolved homicide file opened slowly, photos loading one by one. A warehouse on the south side. A body found bound, execution style. No witnesses, no confession. A clean release for the prime suspect due to lack of evidence. Daniel Cross. Ethan remembered him well. Cross was tall, broad-shouldered, early 40s, with an athlete's build that had softened just enough to suggest comfort, not weakness. Clean-shaven, expensive haircuts. The kind of man who smiled easily in public and never raised his voice. He owned logistics companies, donated to city projects, shook hands with politicians. Ethan had interviewed him once, polite, controlled, eyes steady and empty. No fear, no guilt, just patience. Yet the case had died quietly after that. Ethan scrolled further, stopping on the crime scene photos. Shadow stirred. At first it was subtle, a tightening of the jaw, a shift in breathing. Then the dog lifted its head, ears flattening, as its gaze locked onto the monitor. When Cross's face filled the screen, Shadow's entire body changed. A low tremor ran through him. He pulled back instinctively, nails scraping faintly against the floor. Not aggression, avoidance, recognition. "Easy," Ethan said, standing slowly. "It's just a screen." Shadow didn't hear him. His eyes were fixed, pupils wide, body coiled as if ready to flee or fight. Ethan watched closely, heart pounding now. He had seen fear before, in victims, in suspects, in himself. This wasn't general fear. This was specific. Ethan closed the file. Shadow's breathing eased, though his muscles remained tense. That settled it. Shadow hadn't wandered into the rain by chance. He hadn't chosen a gas station randomly. He had run from something, and from someone. And when he could no longer run, he had gone to the light. To a place where uniforms meant rules, and rules meant safety, at least in theory. Ethan rubbed a hand over his face, exhaustion pressing in. He thought of the partner he'd lost, of the moment when everything had slowed and the world had tilted just enough to never sit right again. He had promised himself he would never chase ghosts, never reopen wounds that couldn't heal. Yet here one was, breathing, watching him. Shadow shifted closer, resting his head near Ethan's boot, close enough to touch, but not demanding it. Trust, tentative and earned through pain. "You remember," Ethan said softly. "Don't you?" Shadow didn't respond the way humans did. He didn't nod. He didn't speak. But his body stayed rigid, as if bracing against a memory that had never let him go. Ethan understood then what this meant. Shadow was not evidence in the traditional sense. There would be no testimony, no statement to record. But memory lived in more places than words in reflex, in fear, in instinct. And Shadow carried all of it. Outside, the rain finally began to slow, leaving the streets slick and shining under the streetlights. Inside the station, Ethan sat back down, staring at the dark monitor. The case was no longer cold, and someone out there would notice. The rumors didn't arrive with sirens or headlines. They seeped in quietly, the way bad weather does, carried by glances that lingered too long and questions asked a second time. Ethan felt it first in the station's rhythm. Radios clicked off mid-sentence. Officers lowered their voices when he walked past, and the security cameras near the evidence room flickered for half a second, too often to be coincidence. Outside, unmarked cars began to idle near the block at odd hours, engines running, headlights off, silhouettes barely visible through rain-streaked glass. Ethan adjusted his routine without announcing it. He parked in different spots, varied his routes, and kept Shadow close. The dog moved better now, still limping slightly but alert, his coat clean to reveal a powerful frame beneath. Broad chest, strong neck, and a face marked by old scars that gave him an air of patience, hardened into resolve. Shadow's ears tracked every sound. His amber eyes measured distance and intent with unnerving accuracy. Whatever had been done to him had not broken his training. It had sharpened it. By the third night, Ethan decided he couldn't delay medical imaging any longer. The bullet lodged near Shadow's shoulder needed a proper scan. He called Sarah Lynn, a veterinarian he trusted from previous canine consults. Sarah was in her late 30s, tall and slim, with straight black hair usually tied back in a practical knot. Her skin carried the even tone of someone who spent long hours under clinic lights rather than the sun. She spoke softly, but her eyes were quick, observant, and unafraid to hold a gaze. Years earlier, she had lost a police dog on her table after a delayed rescue. Since then, her calm carried a hard edge of precision. She didn't waste time, and she didn't miss details. They left the station just after midnight, rain thinning to mist. Ethan drove an unmarked unit. Shadow settled in the back, quiet but watchful. Halfway there, Shadow's posture changed. He rose slightly, head angled toward the rear window, nostrils flaring. Ethan checked the mirror. Headlights appeared, disappeared, then appeared again, too distant to be casual, too steady to be lost. "Stay," Ethan murmured, more to himself than the dog. The headlights closed the gap when he turned onto a darker stretch. Another vehicle slipped in from a side street ahead, forcing him to slow. Ethan felt the world narrow to seconds. Shadow lunged forward, teeth catching Ethan's sleeve, yanking him hard to the right just as something shattered the driver's window. Glass sprayed across the seat. A second later, the sound reached him, metal striking metal. Not a gunshot, but close enough to send his pulse roaring. Ethan jerked the wheel, tires screaming as the car fishtailed and slid into a service lane. The pursuing headlights overshot, momentum carrying them past. Ethan slammed the brake, threw the car into reverse, then forward again, bursting back onto the main road. Shadow braced himself instinctively, body low, weight centered, eyes fixed on the rear. No barking, no panic, just readiness. They didn't stop until the clinic's lights washed over them like a harbor. Sarah met them at the door, her expression tightening as she took in the shattered glass and Ethan's bleeding knuckles. She ushered them inside without questions, locking the door behind her. "That wasn't an accident," she said, already gloving up. Her voice was steady, but the set of her jaw betrayed anger. "No," Ethan replied, "it wasn't." As Sarah examined Shadow, she confirmed what Ethan already suspected. The old wounds matched restraint patterns used in illegal holding sites, tight ties, repeated stress, deliberate pain meant to control without killing. The bullet sat dangerously close to muscle and nerve, its placement precise. "Someone wanted him alive," she said. And silent, Shadow lay still for the scan, eyes never leaving Ethan. When the machine hummed, he didn't flinch. Training held, memory held. Outside, tires rolled past the clinic twice, slow and deliberate. Sarah noticed it too. She shut off the front lights and pulled the blinds, moving with the efficiency of someone who had learned the cost of hesitation. "You need to move him," she said. "Tonight." Ethan nodded. The truth settled heavy and cold in his chest. This wasn't pressure. It was pursuit. Someone had realized Shadow wasn't just a dog that survived. He was a witness that remembered. And witnesses could be hunted. They left through the back, rain returning in sheets as if to erase tracks. Ethan drove with one hand, the other resting where Shadow's head pressed against the seat. The city felt suddenly hostile. At every intersection a question, every shadow a threat. By the time they reached a safe side street near the station, Ethan understood the shape of what he was facing. The past hadn't stayed buried. It had teeth, money, patience, and it was moving now. Shadow lifted his head, meeting Ethan's eyes in the mirror. There was fear there, yes, but beneath it, something steadier, purpose. Ethan swallowed. "I won't give you back," he said quietly. The dog leaned forward, placing his weight against the seat, as if to anchor the promise. Behind them, far down the block, an engine turned over and lights came on. Someone was still watching. Ethan didn't call it a trap, not even in his own head. He thought of it as alignment, putting the past and present in the same room and watching what refused to stay silent. He arranged the meeting under a procedural pretext, a follow-up tied to zoning permits near the old warehouse district, a topic innocuous enough to pass through official channels without stirring alarms. The location was a municipal conference room with glass walls and a single security camera Ethan had personally tested twice. He positioned Shadow just outside the door, close enough to see and hear, far enough to avoid accusation of provocation. Sarah Lynn observed from the back, arms folded, posture straight, her face composed but intent. Her eyes missed nothing, a habit carved by years of measuring outcomes in breaths and heartbeats. Daniel Cross arrived precisely on time. Up close, he looked as he always had. Tall, broad, a tailored charcoal coat hanging easily from his shoulders, hair neatly parted, beard trimmed to a careful shadow that suggested vigor without menace. His smile was courteous, practiced, the kind that smoothed friction rather than erased it. When he shook Ethan's hand, his grip was firm but not challenging. There was a faint scent of expensive cologne, clean and controlled. Cross had the posture of a man accustomed to rooms yielding to him, not because he demanded it, but because he waited. They sat. Ethan asked neutral questions. Cross answered with equal neutrality, voice even, eyes steady. The conversation floated above the real subject like fog over water. Then the door shifted slightly as Shadow moved into view. The change was immediate and unmistakable. Shadow froze, yet his ears flattened, not backward, but low, tight against his head. A tremor ran from his shoulders to his hind legs. He retreated a step, nails clicking softly against tile, then pressed himself against Ethan's knee with a force that spoke of memory, not confusion. A low sound emerged from his chest. Not a bark, not a growl, but a warning shaped by restraint. Cross's gaze flicked toward the dog and back, a movement too quick to be casual. His smile thinned, then returned, brittle at the edges. "He seems nervous," he said lightly. "I'm not good with dogs." Shadow's reaction escalated. He gnashed once at the air, a single snap without forward motion, then tucked his head closer to Ethan's thigh, eyes locked on Cross's hands. His breathing shortened, pupils wide. Sarah lifted her phone, recording, her fingers steady. She had seen fear before, but this was not generalized stress. This was recognition tied to threat. Ethan ended the meeting within minutes, and he walked Cross to the door, thanked him, and watched the man leave without turning his back. As the elevator doors closed, Cross's eyes lingered on Shadow, a beat too long. When the doors shut, Shadow sagged, muscles quivering as if released from a held position. Ethan knelt, resting a hand along the dog's neck, feeling the heat of him, the tremor fading. They didn't celebrate. They cataloged. Sarah reviewed the footage with a behavioral consultant. Ethan had quietly contacted Mark Alvarez, a compact man in his early 50s with salt and pepper stubble and the bearing of someone who had trained animals and people in equal measure. Mark spoke plainly, without theatrics. He pointed to specific cues: the avoidance vector, the guarding posture, the escalation pattern that avoided contact yet prepared for defense. "This isn't fear of a stranger," he said. "It's fear of a known aggressor. Yeah, the dog is mapping threat from stored experience." They cross-referenced timelines. Restraint marks matched equipment seized in a closed case tied to Cross's logistics firm. The bullet's caliber aligned with a weapon registered to a Shell subsidiary. None of it proved guilt alone. Together, it formed a shape. That night, Ethan received the message. It arrived without sender ID, words stark and economical. "Hand over the dog, or you disappear with it." Ethan read it twice, jaw tightening. Outside the station, a car idled across the street, engine purring low. Shadow stood at his side, posture alert but calm now, as if the recognition had clarified something rather than inflamed it. The past was no longer abstract. It had chosen its terms. Ethan made his decision quietly. He filed protective custody paperwork for Shadow under a special evidentiary designation, logged the threat, and initiated a request for judicial oversight. He also moved Shadow to a secure location Sarah had arranged, an after-hours clinic wing with reinforced doors and no exterior windows. Sarah stayed with the dog, her calm a fixed point. She brushed Shadow's coat slowly, speaking in a low cadence that steadied his breath. "You did right," she told him, not as comfort, but as acknowledgement. As Ethan locked the office for the night, he felt the weight of what came next. Cross would not stop. Men like him never did when confronted with mirrors that remembered. But the mirror now had a pulse and a memory that refused erasure. Across town, the idling car rolled away. The hunter had been seen, and the witness had spoken, without a word. Ethan moved with the quiet certainty of someone who had finally stopped reacting and started shaping outcomes. He coordinated internally first, choosing people who asked for facts instead of favors. Deputy Chief Helen Moore was one of them. A woman in her late 50s with iron gray hair, cut short, a square jaw softened by tired eyes, and a reputation for patience earned the hard way. Years earlier, she had testified against a superior who falsified reports. The case cost her promotions, but gave her something rarer in this building trust. Moore read Ethan's brief without interruption, then nodded once. "Make it clean," she said, "and make it count." They did. Shadow was designated a protected evidenti asset under a narrow but lawful interpretation that recognized trained animal behavioral data when corroborated by independent analysis. Sarah Lynn formalized the medical record. Mark Alvarez certified the behavioral findings. The municipal camera logs were pulled, synchronized, and time-stamped. Old warehouse footage dismissed years ago as unusable was reprocessed and sharpened by a junior analyst who noticed a repeating anomaly: a logistics van idling too long, always at the edge of frame, always registered to a shell. Paper trails emerged when forced into the same light. The case didn't reopen loudly, it assembled. Daniel Cross tried to outrun it with politeness. His attorney requested delays. His publicist floated statements. None of it mattered once warrants were signed. The arrest came at dawn outside a charity breakfast, rain slicking the pavement into mirrors. Cross wore a tailored coat and a practiced smile that failed him when he saw Shadow in the back of Ethan's cruiser. The dog didn't move. He didn't bark. He simply watched, amber eyes steady. His Cross's shoulders tightened. The smile collapsed. Officers moved in, cuffs clicked, cameras rolled. The shape finally had a name. In the days that followed, the building exhaled. Files closed. Statements finalized. The threat messages stopped. Shadow was transferred to a secure wing Sarah had reinforced. No exterior windows, controlled access, quiet routines. He healed in increments, muscle memory yielding to rest. His coat regained its sheen. The limp softened. When storms passed, he slept through them. Ethan filed the last form after a night shift that smelled like rain. The adoption packet sat thin and official on his desk, a stack of signatures that turned a promise into a home. He hesitated only long enough to think of his partner's laugh on wet pavement years ago, then signed. When he told Shadow, the dog leaned his weight against Ethan's knee, solid and present, a language Ethan had learned to read. They walked home under a clearing sky. The city looked different when you weren't scanning for threats, edges less sharp, distances kinder. Ethan's apartment was spare but clean, the kind of place that made room rather than noise. Shadow explored with care, nose low, tail level, cataloging the world the way survivors do. He chose a spot by the window and settled there, a quiet sentinel. Weeks later, on a night much like the first, rain returned without warning. Ethan pulled on his jacket, clipped a leash to Shadow's collar, and stepped into the street. The patrol route felt familiar again, not because it was safe, but because it made sense. They moved together past the gas station, its lights humming, glass clean. No scratching tonight, just rain and footsteps, and the small, stubborn piece of work done right. When they reached the end of the block, Ethan paused. Shadow looked up at him, ears relaxed, eyes clear. There was no command, no test, just understanding. Ethan nodded once, and they turned back, reflections stretching across the wet pavement. Two figures aligned, carrying the past without letting it steer. Sometimes miracles do not arrive with thunder or light. They come quietly, on four tired legs, in the middle of the rain, scratching at a door most people would pass by. This story is not just about a dog or a police officer. It is about how God often chooses the smallest voice to carry the greatest truth. When the world tried to bury the past, God kept a witness alive. When fear tried to silence justice, He sent help in a form no one expected. In our daily lives, we are given moments like this more often than we realize. A chance to stop, to listen, to help instead of turning away. A wounded soul asking for help may not speak our language, but the call is the same. And when we answer, something changes. not just for them, but for us. If this story touched your heart, let it remind you, God sees what others ignore, as God remembers what the world forgets, and He still works through compassion. May God bless you and your loved ones. May He protect those who walk alone in the rain, and may He guide our hearts to choose kindness, courage, and truth. If you believe in quiet miracles, please share this story so it can reach someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from. We'd love to hear your voice. And subscribe to the channel to support more stories of faith, compassion, and the unbreakable bond between humans and animals. God bless you, and thank you for listening.